March of 1982, Black Presbyterians United held their Edler G. Hawkins Award Banquet in Philadelphia. The Reverend W. Eugene Houston was the guest speaker. Awards were presented to the Reverend J. Oscar McLeod, General Director of the Program Agency of the United Presbyterian Church, and to the Reverend Leon Faniel, former Executive Director of the General Assembly Mission Council.
Our speaker is a fourth-generation Presbyterian clergy person. He's now the Assistant Secretary and Eastern Representative for the Board of Pensions of the United Presbyterian Church in the USA. Before he went to this position, he was the pastor at Westminster Presbyterian Church in Cedar Manor, Queens, New York, where, if I remember correctly, he was the first black pastor there, and he caused a lot of change to take place there. Before he went to Cedar Manor, Westminster Cedar Manor, he was the pastor, and at that time he was my pastor, and he still is, for 24 years at the Rendell Presbyterian Church, where he labored and he was a teacher, a preacher, and a pastor. And where we began and we grew under his leadership. He's a graduate of Johnson C. Smith University in 1941. He graduated as summa cum laude. In 1944, he graduated with his theological degree with high honors.
45 years ago, I began a quest. My quest in the service of the Lord was for not yet verbalized, but conceptualized in my own mind, an unsegregated church in an unsegregated society. Dr. Dotson said today we were black before we were Presbyterian. Well, I was a Presbyterian when I came out. And my dad tells me they bowed when I was born in Hot Springs, Arkansas, and knelt at the bed and dedicated me to the Lord. Well, for 15 years I fought it. I was determined to do anything else but. But at the age of 15, I decided to make this move. I believed the verbiage bandied about then. Prepare yourself. The church is a means of bringing the kingdom of God on earth. I was prepared to work myself out of a job when I came out of seminary. I believe, yes, I firmly believe that before my retirement, there would be no more black congregations. I believe that. I also believe that there probably wouldn't be any place for a black clergyman in an unsegregated church. I was right about that. But I'm just 3 years away from repacking it in, and the dream is no nearer fulfillment now than it was when I was taken under care of Presbytery as a candidate for the ministry in 1937. With all the long list of people we have in administrative positions in the United Presbyterian Church, you can count on one hand black people serving white congregations. And I'm here to tell you, for my money, the highest position in the church is the pastorate. I never intended to leave the pastorate. But if I had not taken this job, I had done what I wanted, what I pleased. I have never done anything I didn't enjoy. Never. Iceman, mortar mixer, short order cook, wrangler for the Cowboys. I enjoyed every bit of it. But I believe, and we took it out of the church of the Constitution, but it used to be on the part referring to ministry. The ministry is first in the order of usefulness and dignity in the church. That's what I was ordained under, and I still believe it. And there's no higher calling to me than the pastoral ministry. I speak tonight from the heart, from concern for this church, which we love. The impossible dream. Let me hasten to say that I'm really speaking to the youth tonight. Can't teach an old dog new tricks. I'm reminded of the story of the woman who went to a Roman Catholic church to pray for something, and the little altar boy was behind the statue of the infant Jesus of Prague. And she began to pray for this item, and she went on and on to the Virgin Mother, and finally he could take it no longer, and he said, "You were here every day this week praying for the same thing." And she replied, "I wasn't talking to you, Jesus, I was talking to your mama." Well, I'm not talking to the adults tonight, I'm talking to the young people. There is hope. There is hope with them. You elders may listen in if you choose, or stop your ears up. Some of you may not realize, young people, what a battle it has been to get where we are. I remind my children, when they were growing up, from whence we'd come. Not to tell them, eat everything, because when I was growing up, we were in the Depression, and it was so hard. Not that. But where we'd come from as a race. The things, the indignities we had to endure. I remember once in 1932, when my father was pastoring in a little town in Arkansas, and we went to the WPA cannery to can the beans that he had raised in the garden that we had, without which we could not have existed, 5 children. And this woman, this white woman, kept addressing him as uncle. Well, I don't know whether he was insulted because he didn't think he was old enough to be called uncle. But finally, after she did it the 3rd time, he said, Eugene, come here. Meet your cousin. That stopped the uncle bit. But we had to endure these indignities. In the same town, I was bombarded by a woman. My mother sewed. We couldn't have made it. The kids used to call me in school. They teased me till I was gone away to school because I wore short pants. My mother made everything. We couldn't have made it without that. And I went to they also used to tease me. I had a tailor-made coat when I finished high school, and they called it the 10th Commandment coat. Thou shalt not cover. That just goes to show, here again, our use of the English language. They didn't know that was covet. They thought it was cover, like the kid in Sunday school who said that she learned in Sunday school today that the bear was cross-eyed, from the hymn, Gladly the Cross-Eyed Bear. Or the man who was teaching Sunday school, and my professor of Hebrew in theological school swears this is true, said he went in and the man was saying that Joshua had no parents. No parents. So he wouldn't embarrass him, and he asked him, well, why did you say that, Mr. McClellan? He said, well, the Bible clearly says Joshua, the son of Nun. Well, here again, we've got to learn the English language. And if you want to be bilingual, then you learn another language. I'll get back to that later. Some of you, I had the experience at Westminster where I tried to get them involved in Black Presbyterians United, and they said, I'm Presbyterian first. As Dr. Dodson said, we were born black first, and there's very little likelihood that we'll ever change. You know, we're prone to shy away from an unpleasant past, to shut it out as if it never existed. In my lifetime, they were lynching blacks as close as the eastern shore of Delaware. A stone's throw from here, where I like to go now to get fried oysters and chicken salad. Not just in Georgia and Alabama and Mississippi. Some of us have an ambivalence about who we are. We have a crisis identity. If you don't know it, I'm here to tell you, and this has been repeated before, we have not arrived. No. And I don't expect we're going to arrive, really arrive to the point where we are all accepted individually. In the lifetime, not only of myself, but of my 6-year-old granddaughter and my grandchild, boy or girl, whichever is on the way. Neither my 9-year-old, nor my 6-year-old, nor the one that's on the way. I don't see it. I think it's an impossible dream I had, not to mention what Martin Luther King had. Let me give you an example. Back in 1964, when my son was chosen by his prep school to be an exchange student, to go to Japan for a year under the American Friends Service Committee, came right down here to Philadelphia. There were 400 odd. He was the only black in the group. Of course, we weren't saying black in those days, were we? We were saying Negro. Doesn't matter to me. Still the same. A rose is a rose. He was 18 years old. And he came back, and I said, well, Bjorn, how did it go? He said, well, Dad, we got into a civil rights discussion. You know, he said, they don't think we're human. Did you hear me what I said? He said, they don't think we're human. And he'd never experienced that before. I love to be liked, but I'd rather be respected. And that's what we've got to teach ourselves. Be prepared. Be ready to walk in when the door opens. When you knock the door down, because it doesn't open on its own. When you knock the door down and walk in, you be sure that you're prepared to take over the responsibility. I have to confess to you, I'm a racist. I'm a racist. I'm a black racist. Now, I'm not the kind of racist that the whites are who want to pull themselves up at somebody else's expense. I don't hate anybody. I don't envy anybody. As a matter of fact, I have often preached the sermon about changing places and the Indian proverb, if you envy somebody else, walk a mile in his moccasins. So I realize, that if you want to have what someone else has, you've got to exchange even up. You got to take the warts and the beauty marks and the advantages and the disadvantages. So I don't know anybody in this world I would exchange places with. Nobody. But I envy two peoples. I envy them. I envy the Jews for their cohesiveness. And you know they got arguments and difficulties. They fight among themselves behind closed doors like we fight out in the open. But when they come out in the open, they are together. They are together. And I envy the Koreans. I envy those people for my people, from my racist point of view, because they are generous to the church. Do you hear me? Preached at a white church in Lent last year, and the pastor tells me that those people, some of them give $100 a Sunday. And we give maybe $5, and I'm being generous. $5 and we think it's something. I told the fellow, I believe it doesn't hurt you to give. I learned that when I used to try to give collections to the church. I was always scuffling. When I began to give offerings, I didn't want. My dad used to say there's a difference between an offering and a collection. Little boy started out from the dinner table one day with all the best parts. When the roast was cut, he was going on his way out with it. His dad stopped him. "Where are you going?" He said, "I'm going to feed Rover." He said, "No, you're not." So then, when dinner was all over and he picked up the scraps and the bones, he went out and he took them to Rover. He said, "Rover, I was going to bring you an offering, but all I got is a collection." And we in the Presbyterian church, black Presbyterians, all we give are collections, the leftovers, what we can dispense with, what we can spare, what we can afford. And we are the most demanding people. We not only want the best, we demand the best. And there's an old saying, beggars can't be choosers. Yet we are. We demand and we go with our hands open, outstretched, like the story of the little boy who came home from school and his mother greeted him. He said, "Mama, I want a quarter to take to school tomorrow." She said, "A quarter? A whole quarter? What for?" He said, "Well, teacher says we are to give to the poor." And he said, "Give to the poor? Boy, what you think you is?" So you tell that teacher to take you off the giving list and put you on the getting list. And that's what we've been on this getting list. Gimme, gimme, gimme. Gimme. And we can't continue to do that. We've got to support us, and we can afford it. You go into any black Presbyterian church. When I was at Rendell, I used to talk about, oh boy, the mink coats and whew. Man. Yes. And the majority, when I went there in 1944, they didn't give any mission giving, no mission giving. They didn't, what's that? Fortunately, when I left in '68, they were giving more to mission than the whole budget was when I got there. But we want to take all the time. We've got to give. And I'm afraid, young people, it's an impossible dream for these old folks to change their habits. So I'm saying to you, don't be like them. Don't be like them. If you want something, be prepared to pay for it. Put it down front. You know, the other thing about us, you'd be surprised. We are in hock to our ears. We spend money before we even got it in hand. The check is gone before we get it. Even our income tax refunds are gone before they get back. Gone. It's a natural proclivity because even the OPEC nations, they have discovered now that they're beyond their depth. They can't meet the grand schemes that they had on the basis of the money that was pouring in. There's a quotation that I live by, and it's from a man that I detest. But I find myself quoting him more and more all the time. And it's old Dr. Samuel Johnson. And you know what that rascal said? He was a dyed-in-the-wool Tory. And he said, resolve not to be poor. Always spend less than you have. So poverty is an enemy to human happiness. It makes some virtues extremely impracticable and others virtually impossible.
The pilgrimage from the campus of Boggs Academy to the position of General Director of the Program Agency was not quick and easy. It was not completed in transportation vehicles, but by the kind of determination that puts discouragement to flight, the kind of commitment that causes vacillation to go into retreat, and the kind of tenacity that ushers the individual into the arena to wrestle with the enemies of the human spirit until victory emerges. Our honoree is a man of integrity. He says what he means, and he means what he says. What he says is not determined by a desire to please those who hear him. You know, some people play to the gallery. This honoree doesn't do that. But what he says, rather, is to ensure that his statements will be consonant with the truth that is in him. I'm pleased to present my friend and yours to receive the Edler Garnett Hawkins Award. I know of no more worthy and deserving recipient than J. Oscar McLeod. And I present.
I was on a sabbatical. And during that sabbatical, along with the project that I was working on, I took the opportunity to become better acquainted with a man whose name Edler G. Hawkins carried with him through life to his death. A man whose name was Henry Highland Garnett. A man who died exactly 100 years this year, 100 years ago. Henry Highland Garnett was an equal to Frederick Douglass, but he's not known as well as Frederick Douglass. He's not known as well as Frederick Douglass for one simple reason alone. Henry Highland Garnett was a radical black abolitionist. He was a radical black abolitionist among white abolitionists. But the reason we ought to remember his name is because he was a black Presbyterian. He was a pastor in Troy, New York, and New York City, and finally at 15th Street Church in Washington, D.C. We, as black Presbyterians, have a right to be proud that we are Presbyterians, not in contrast or in comparison with someone else, but because we have been about the business of witnessing to Jesus Christ for more than 175 years. It was Henry Highland Garnett who was the first black man to give an address in the House of Representatives of the United States Congress. So we, Gene Houston and all the rest of us, stand in a good tradition. But I have a word that I want to leave with you, brothers and sisters. And I'm not trying to be dramatic, but I've had a couple of questions asked me since I have been here. Questions like, am I going to stand for another term? And I think they've been sincere questions. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that I'm convinced that I have devoted the major amount of time that I'm going to devote to this particular task. And the business of what happens after Oscar McLeod voluntarily or whatever fashion moves on to something else is your business and not my burden. I will be in that business with you, but it is not my responsibility. I have done in the 10 years that I have been in this job the best that I knew how. And I will go on doing that. My basic principle has been that if I did the best that I knew how to do in this job, as a servant of Jesus Christ working in the United Presbyterian Church, then I would serve our best interest at the same time. I have not done it in reverse, brothers and sisters. I have not assumed that my first agenda in this job was to be a black general director of the program agency of the United Presbyterian Church. I have one disappointment, and some of you might assume that since I have been general director for this long, I shouldn't have any disappointments. Gene Houston echoed, what is my disappointment? It is that I and you are part of a church which finds it possible to accept someone like myself in a position like the position I'm in, but finds it impossible to accept us as pastors of the churches. I have zigzagged across this country speaking in congregations, from country congregations to the largest congregation in this denomination in Kansas. But I wager you that when I step down or leave this position to go on to something else, the chances are I will be knocking on the doors of some of the congregations that you represent, which in itself will not be a disappointment to me. I hope I will, in the meantime, see some other brothers and sisters serving some of those other congregations. I accept this award with a deep sense of humility and simply say to you, I thank you for the award, but I thank you most of all for the fact that most of you have allowed me to continue being Oscar McLeod in spite of this position.
My task tonight is to talk about Leon Faneuil, the lay person's dream. Your pastor is sitting there, you are standing before God and the world, and you can talk about it. Leon Edward Faneuil.
This is the first time in my life that I have received an award from my people, and that's very special. Because while I am not one to do a lot of talking, I care an awful lot about who I am and who you are. And just the fact that you think enough to recognize what I have tried to do is perhaps the greatest gift that you could give me.